Cool. We're all here today to talk about sessions and how we're going to collect it, what is a session, define it, and determine what of sessions we need for our dashboards for the internal preview specifically. I think there's a lot we can dive into with sessions in general, especially with stuff from the proof of concepts in terms of like recording sessions and things like that. But I think for the purposes of this meeting, we'll just want to keep it defined or scoped to the internal preview and specifically how we can tie the event data that we're already collecting to sessions, and then what we want out of it for the first preview. I guess Tim, you wanted a demo from Max about the seeder, is that right? Or do we want to just get into like sessions first? How do we want to start things off?
I love them, but we can definitely dive directly into topics. So yeah.
All right. I guess Max, do you want to kind of just recap what you've been looking at as far as pre-aggregations?
Sure. So yeah, I've been looking mostly today at what are pre-aggregations, how we can use them best, especially for larger projects, and then which leads us nicely into how we can use sessions. And as I've realized in the last couple of hours, how Cube's examples of how we implement sessions are very much tailored to using AWS Redshift and not ClickHouse, which will present some interesting problems. So yeah, good news first is I was able to create one of our product analytics stacks and import around 1 million or so sort of pseudo-anonymized events with about 1,000 unique users. And I'm able to query that using Cube, using the pre-aggregations that are set up. And that is segmented by anonymous user ID and can be searched for by like hour, minute, even second. And that kind of works as advertised, which is pretty good. And depending on how our infrastructure is set up, we can set that up to automatically refresh every hour, every minute, every 10 hours, whatever we want. And that just kind of works. I'll just share my screens quickly. So that's just in your regular schema. You can define a bunch of pre-aggregations. So one called hourly user, which uses a category index of the anonymous ID, and then every 5 seconds refreshes it on an hourly basis, which is probably not great in production, but for testing purposes, it's great. And then down to as far as every second, where we'll refresh that every hour. In terms of actually querying that, it works pretty much as you'd expect. So here's the standard GraphQL query. And I'm pulling the last 2,000 users. Let's up the stakes a little bit, and we can do that by second. Watch it not work now. It's been flawless. There you go. No, so there you go. You can see all the information. It's going to make my browser crash, but the data's there and it's returned pretty quickly over about 1 million or so records. If you try and display it in a chart in Firefox in my browser, it doesn't work. The data is retrieved, but then the front end crashes because there's too much to put into a pivot table in my browser. So that's a front end problem. But in terms of the back end, that seems okay. And you can limit them by the number of individual users you want, or you can even create pivot tables as well, which is pretty cool. The interesting thing here is that you can see, so in this one, I'm segmenting by second. You can see which of the pre-aggregations apply to this query. So for example, if I were to update this to hour, you can see the pre-aggregations, it will use any of them because you can a second pre-aggregation can just be re-aggregated to an hour. So that's where I am in terms of sort of understanding how pre-aggregations work and the fact that they do what we need to do. In answer to Dennis's question earlier, which is what difference does it make if I don't have pre-aggregations? At least in my local machine, it just doesn't work. The query just times out and it doesn't function at all. Whether that'll be the case in the productionized ClickHouse instance, I don't know, but it gives you some idea of how necessary this is.
Well, an M1 Max is definitely an interesting benchmark machine to have. So you're saying if you're querying against 1 million rows of data, like it just doesn't even work.
It sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. I'm wondering if it works when it's stored in memory and returns from that. So maybe by starting the query, I'm generating it, it's storing it in memory, I'm running it again, and then
Right.
it's returning the data. But it's super inconsistent. As soon as I set up pre-aggregations, it just kind of works.
I mean, that's still a good before. I mean,
Yeah,
it goes from inconsistent to returning in a few seconds.
Exactly. So that's pretty good. Which leads us on to the Cube's event analytics, which isn't a feature in itself. This is just sort of a set of tutorials about how we set it up using Cube. As far as I can tell, this all looks good and all works. The thing that I haven't figured out yet is this line here. When we create in the sessions table, it uses this lag function, which from what I understand is about searching between windows. So we want a 30-minute window from a particular point. This aggregate function is not supported in ClickHouse.
Yeah.
So there are ways around that. I just don't know what they are yet.
Yeah, that's similar to what we both, or I think we all at this point encountered with funnel analysis. Like the tutorials, the queries aren't all applicable to ClickHouse, or if they are, they may be lacking support either through the Cube driver itself, or ClickHouse just has their own way of doing it. Or I think in the case of funnels, we just have to define it ourselves in terms of the query. Like we would use the similar concepts in terms of like defining a separate Cube, but we would use something else for it.
Yeah.
In this particular case, lag just doesn't work in ClickHouse. There is alternatives, but I'm yet to dig into those.
Yeah, I can send you the schemas that I used in the POC, but please take them not for granted, because I rewrote exactly that lag function into lag in frame, which should be quite the same. So that should be helpful, but I'm pretty sure I also might have jumped a step here or there just to get it working.
That's fine. Give me everything you have, and I'll work with that.
Yeah,
cool.
well,
I will send you my full schema folder.
Thank you.
Now.
So yeah, that's where I am in terms of figuring out the back-end technical bits of it. But yeah, the other questions here are very much what do we want to do rather than how do we do it?
Yeah, I think answering those questions will then help us like give you a better idea of what to be looking for. And then that'll also help define, okay, we have these dashboards. Of course, we're still trying to define exactly what we want ultimately in those dashboards, but then that will tell us, yeah, what cubes do we need set up? How does that get replicated? Like we haven't really touched the cube configuration at all, right? We've got the stack set up, we've got it integrated with GitLab, but we haven't really covered like what schemas do need to exist to power these pre-built dashboards. So I think answering these questions I've kind of called out in the agenda will at least get us a little bit closer to that. Cool. So yeah, as far as defining the sessions, so the way Cube has it defined is they've taken a look at the segment analytics SDK and just defined a session as any period of or string of activities that happens like basically within an activity window over 30 minutes. So like that is what separates sessions. I guess the first thing to pull the room on is like, do we agree with that? Is 30 minutes enough between sessions, or do we think it needs to be 15 minutes or something else, or any opinions on that?
So to confirm, that means the time between two events is less than 30 minutes, not the time of the first event to the last event is 30 minutes, correct?
Over 30 minutes, but yes. So the time between any two events, if it's over 30 minutes, then those are separate sessions. So if you've opened an issue, for example, like if you're in the internal handbook and you're browsing and then 30 minutes pass or 30 minutes and 1 second passes and you browse again, those are separated by sessions.
Okay.
And then
if I do something every 20 minutes, for example, that whole string of events is one session.
That is all one session, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what I would be expecting from that then.
Yeah.
I think 30 minutes is probably fine. Is this a two-way decision if we decide we want to change this, or if customers decide they want shorter or longer sessions?
Customers is a different story, because that means they have to define their own Cube schemas, which is like, that's a whole other thing of like, do they have access to Cube and do we offer that with our pre-built dashboards? So I would say like, that's a whole can of different worms. As far as two-way decision and how we want to define it, yes, we can change that. If we try, we could start with 30 minutes and we decide we want to increase or decrease that window, we can certainly do that. Giving customers control, though, is a completely different topic, in my opinion.
I think that's okay. I don't know how commonly that would be asked for, but if it's a code change for us and everyone says we want to change the default, that's fine.
Yeah,
I think based on that, 30 minutes is probably a good length. If you walk away from your computer for half an hour, I think we should consider you have stopped using the computer and you're now using the computer again.
yeah, it's a very opinionated topic because I'm sure people will have like 15 minutes is like more common or like whatever. But yeah, we can tweak that as we go. Ultimately, as well, as far as customers having that request, you know, if we don't offer it as a configurable option, ultimately they can deploy their own stack, go into the cube schema themselves,
Yes.
and change that window. So they still have control over that if they really want to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. At the end of the day, like everything is within their reach to define. It's just how much of it do we make, how much of an easier job do we make for them to do so. So yeah. Okay. So then we're okay with the definition for now, and then we'll move forward with that. And then if we need to tweak, we can go from there. Cool. Tim, you want to call out your point here?
Yeah, so just to make everyone aware and on the same page, so we got some pushback on using Jitsi in the first place. How I see it at the moment is it's a shortcut to get us to tracking as soon as possible. And at a later point, we still can replace it because it's a part of the system, which is an endpoint. But I would like to see, as we have also the product intelligence team, which would be taking this over at some point, is what we would need to get a Jitsi replacement in place and what can be the benefits of it. And on the other hand, how much work does it need to get us there so that we can make a good strategy planning? Do we do this rather now? This is the impact, this is the costs, this is the benefit. And one of the things that I had in mind looking at how Cube is doing sessions with those views, do you think they are doable also on a large scale? Would you rather do this also on a big scale through these Cube views, or would you rather take the route, because we definitely will need this anyhow, to do some sort of pre-aggregation and post-aggregation? So this means like if we get in an event, what we have right now already with this data enrichment, which would Jitsi replacement would also need to do, like user agent string parsing, location adding, pseudo anonymization, full anonymization, however you would configure it. But also then, as the event has been written to the database, that you come back and basically check, are there any sessions, and basically create a record in a table, which is called sessions, which says, okay, person X had a session from here to there with that account amount of events, came from this URL as a referral, and so on and so on. So to make simply the analytics on the analytics stage at a later point much easier without going through 7 different hoops. Yeah, would love to hear your input.
Yeah, so just from like what I see, the kind of like logical steps of progression for this is like Max has figured out, you know, the pre-aggregations, and now we're going through the motions of like getting the cube set up. And what I'm curious about is like, can we set up pre-aggregations on those cubes then to help with the scale and like make that more manageable? And then from my perspective as well, is like, what does that impact on like the hardware itself in terms of storage and memory of doing so? And then like modeling that, or like, okay, well, this is how it performs, this is how much it uses in memory or storage for 1 million events or 10 million events or and 100 million events, and eventually just extrapolate that to, can this scale in a shared pool environment or not? So I think we're in the process of figuring that out, but I don't think we have an answer yet there. I think that's what we're going to be figuring out very, very soon.
If it's a priority to get hard, solid numbers on that, that's fine. We can do that. I've today definitely hit the limit of what my laptop can handle, but that's fine. We've got the cloud. We can figure out the size of those data sets fairly simply, bearing in mind that we've got a pretty fixed list of database columns. So the size the database uses up, bearing in mind most of those columns are always filled, should scale fairly linearly. So if we want to set up an example with 1 million, 10 million, 100 million events, and then see how quickly it responds with various pre-aggregations and how much space those pre-aggregations take up, then we can totally do that. I think the short answer is a lot.
So when you hit a limit, what was specifically hitting that? Like when you're querying without the preags, or
a bit of everything really, mostly
Okay.
without the pre-aggregations.
Okay.
But I wasn't hitting any space limits. I was hitting processing limits.
we don't have any memory limits defined in the dev kit for Cube as well, right? So that's just using as much as it can. If I'm not
Probably whatever Docker's limit is, which is probably not that high.
fair. Okay. Because I'm wondering if there's like a artificial ceiling we're hitting before you're actually hitting like the limits of your machine.
It's
Unless you know
possible.
like your fans are like running or something like that.
No, there was none of that. It was just Cube was returning very unhelpful errors that were basically saying there's no data here for me to show you.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that'll be important to figure out if this is something we can actually even offer like in a shared pool environment, or if, yeah, how does this would likely determine also like how we structure Cube, like if we need specific like Cube instance dedicated to namespaces or things like that, similar to how we are doing like Jitsi tables. I guess
My gut feeling is probably a shared pool is probably fine, depending how big your pool is.
Yeah.
Right. That's my guess right now.
Right. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is like it would be good to see how it Cube scales so that we can scale the cluster or clusters commensurate with how Cube needs to scale. But yeah, should be fine. So I guess Tim, to answer your question, do you believe sessions through Cube would be usable in a big data set? Signs pointing yes, but we're still kind of fully working to answer that question with higher confidence. But right now we don't have any indications that it wouldn't be the case.
The fact that in the Cube documentation they give you a long list of instructions on how to implement this and make it production ready suggests to me that they expect this as a use case. They do suggest in production that you end up using things like Redis Sentinel or Redis Pool, or actually no, they're replacing Redis, aren't they? Cube Store, which I assume runs scaling horizontally.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of unknowns here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll basically just boil down to it will start to cost X amount of dollars to run this for sure.
Oh yeah.
Like if for example, without naming names, like large customers are going to require their own, 192 gig machine for this to like, run Cube Store on or something like that. Like we just need to know what that'll, how that'll work.
That's a definite possibility.
96.
If you're doing big queries that aren't pre-aggregated, they have to be loaded into memory, and that's not cheap.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and my gut feeling tells me that we rather like a aggregated version of exactly that terms of data would rather help us earlier than later. Of basically crunching that as soon as the events are coming in and checking up on those.
Because the alternative too is instead of storing it in memory, we have separate like ETLs that like pre-process it, or we can queue that so that eventually that gets crunched for. It's more manual control on our end, but like there are ways around it so that we can keep the resources constrained a little bit more if that's a major concern. But we'll still have to answer those questions.
And you can set up Cube to do the pre-aggregations on a separate thread process, even machine, I think. So I don't know the details, but if you can offload that into some background job, then at least we're not hogging too many resources from one single shared machine.
Yeah, my fear would be if we do both in a full production sized version in the sense of pre-aggregation plus the views on sessions, this becomes super heavy during processing part. If you do this when the events come in, it's like, oh, that's my start, that's my end, let's write this to another table. The only problem that you would have there is that you have most probably like sliding schemas over time, because you figure out, hey, we need to figure out something else on my session table, and you can't do this, then you can, but it's also another type of lift if we do this, basically going back in time. If we figure out at some point, for a session, we also want to know the temperature at that location and write it also into that table.
So you're saying if you're doing it like on as events are getting collected, like we would kind of like be using session IDs to like mark whether it belongs to the previous running session for that user or not, or how it just working?
My idea would be that there is basically like a cron job, a classic one, going around all the time and taking a look at the events that came in and taking a look if from that user there was any sort of event that came in longer than 30 minutes. If not, okay, then we can wrap up that session, write an entry to a session table and say, okay, that was the starting event that was that we tracked, that was at 12 a.m. and then at 12:35 a.m. there was the last event and had so many events, and the referral on the first event was coming from that page. So everything that we would like to know about the whole construct of a session, basically right as soon as we have a timeout from the last event moving forward.
Okay,
and
so sorry.
And if we have something like we anyhow would do like Jitsu, that the event comes in and gets enriched, they do it by writing it into Redis and having basically a session storage, then we could also write like a timeout key over there and say, okay, the last event for user XYZ came in at this time. And then we basically have a checker against this Redis to see, okay, we didn't receive any more events since 30 minutes. Good, let's figure this out.
And
okay.
in theory, that should be something we can do with pre-aggregations in Cube. But like you say, if we're doing that and we're doing a Jitsu, and then it becomes potentially heavy. It depends how heavy the pre-aggregation process is. It doesn't seem massive, but then depends what it is you're pre-aggregating, I guess.
Yeah, it's I can start measuring that. I'm going to set up a separate cluster to like experiment with that and see what the machine's doing, just to get a better look into that. So yeah, I'll tinker with that this week. Okay. Were you okay with that answer, Tim, then? I mean, I guess we're still trying to figure out, like whether it's going to scale, but to what degree we're still trying to figure that out.
Please simply keep it in mind that we could throw away Jitsu earlier than later. And
Sure.
if we do it, then we would do it there. So I don't want to go completely over the top with anything in Cube. I think it's totally fine for now to do pre-aggregation. That's something we anyhow will need. And if we have this view in Cube for sessions and we get this working rather faster than that it takes a couple of months, then let's do that also. But keep in mind that we might, if we see, okay, we need some more work on top of this, okay, then let's figure out again the Jitsu plan. What I will do now, I will write everything down that I would believe that we would do or need in a Jitsu replacement, own self-built thingy. And there is not only just a session, but it's also the data enrichment that we would have better control. One of the things that I definitely can see is also that we do in this post-aggregation, where we would then also basically combine data for sessions, is also that there is tons of ML stuff that we can do around funnel analysis and funnel discovery and basically crunching down overall data that is way too heavy at the later point. So anything that we can do there definitely will give us an advantage earlier rather than later. So, but it comes down and boils down to a strategic decision. When do we start with a Jitsu replacement? So
is there a thread to follow as far as, you know, why we need to move off of Jitsu right now?
There's simply the ask and the push of a couple of people, including Sid, to see, okay, is this a component that we want to rely on a big future, a long-term future? I see Jitsu personally still as it gets us to market super quick by setting up a couple of things and have tracking, which is super boring to build. And a couple of things, Jitsu has also those scripts for data enrichment and stuff like that. So a couple of things we could also do there. But I simply want to create now an epic, write down everything that we need, make most probably then also some t-shirt weight sizing of giving basically an estimate and say, okay, if we want to replace Jitsu now, we need to invest 5 months of work. X.
Okay. Right.
And that's the plan here.
Got it. Okay. Cool. Pre-aggregations for X active users, I believe that would be the same. Sorry, I'm jumping around the agenda. So Cube has that reference doc. It does include a number of different additional metrics for like number of events per session, bounce rate, things like that. I think some of those will lend itself to the dashboard, at least from what's been initially kind of presented from the vision proof of concept. So I don't know if we really, or if we want to discuss this synchronously right now or give some thoughts to it, but I was just kind of posing the question of like, what from the sessions data do we want to actually surface in the audience dashboard? So for reference, we have the vision from the vision proof of concepts, users and new as single stack components. So that would effectively be new versus returning sessions. Number of total sessions, I think that's a given, and an average session duration and average sessions per user. Are we okay with that as far as like the initial offering? So like, yeah, let's start with that question.
Yeah, I mean, technically all possible.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. The metrics you just enumerated, Dennis, are going to be ones that people are going to care about when they think about how do my users engage with my product or application.
Yeah.
And is a common enough bar that it's a good place for us to start from, and people can customize on top of it from there.
Yeah. That's good, because I think balance rate and those other things are nice to have, but I don't want to scope creep right now. So if we're okay with the first four, so sessions new versus returning, number of total sessions, average session duration, and then average sessions per user, then I think we can start with that and go from there.
Is that number? Oh, it's in the document, not an issue.
It's in the agenda. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will. I just wanted to do this for note taking, and then I'll transfer it over to an issue or the wherever it needs to go. I just noted some.
That's fine. I can. Sorry,
Go for it.
I was going to say I can start working on that over the next couple of days and seeing if we can overcome the issue with ClickHouse lag. But looking at the thing Tim sent me, I think it should be relatively easy.
Always the fun time of manually verifying the data is as it is, but your efforts are appreciated there. I just noticed some topics just to go through the agenda. I called this out earlier. I'm quite curious about the performance impact, as we discussed, of Cube pre-aggregations, as well as the views and how that'll scale per namespace, per project. And then as those namespaces inevitably collect more and more events, but I'll start setting up a cluster to start getting some visibility into that, separate from our main sandbox cluster. Tim, you had a question.
Yes, I had the question around, so that pre-aggregations would also solve Mao, DAO, WOW, as we have them predefined at GitLab at the moment. Sam, have you confirmed this already? Yes. Okay, perfect.
I haven't confirmed it to myself, but there are lengthy things in the Cube documentation about how to implement DAO, WOW, and MAO specifically. So based on that, I would think it can be done. Having a look at the SQL measures that they provide, that looks what I'm expecting to see. So I don't want to say yes, definitely, but yeah, probably.
Cool.
Now, there are certainly ways to manually query for that, but there's already Cube documentation. It's another view, another cube to I think it's called a rolling window attribute, where you can define for what intervals do you want to define your active users. So if you can think of more funny sounding acronyms, then I'm sure it can support it.
Well, because wouldn't the pre-aggregations that Max did the screen share with earlier, we would just change the granularity to daily or monthly, and that would get us either the DAO or the MAO metric we're interested in?
Well, the pre-aggregation is just storing the results, or storing the results for the query. But I think you can run pre-aggregations. You need cubes to like basically create a result set, right? And then you can run pre-aggregations on that. So you could use both, but I think we would want to use both actually.
Yeah, to be fair,
ultimately.
the link that I've just put in the agenda for daily, weekly, and monthly active users doesn't use pre-aggregations at all. It's just how you would query them, assuming you didn't need to. So yeah, you're right. There's a lot of crossover there.
And my other question was around where are we going to manage the schema for Cube so we can have it in DevKit and also in the deployed Cube. And yeah.
That's a good question. We have an analytics stack repo. I can put it there for now, until we have a better place for it. I guess, well, no, actually, we would want something shared between the analytics stack, because analytics stack is the production version and then DevKit is the dev version. So I think we would want our separate one. I know you created one before, Tim, in like the analytics section of space. So
yeah, for storing just Cube files. I mean, we could also, or we simply go the way of rather doing first in DevKit now in those iterations, and as soon as we are happy with, for example, all the DAO vows, then we can take that schema, copy it over to our bigger stack, and then do more work in DevKit. So like a manual process, so that we don't have like one thing where we are rolling out something in the DevKit and could break then also the production version. Does that make sense?
I like that idea. Start in DevKit and then graduate it to analytics stack once we're happy with it. And in the process, we would be like testing it anyways on like some cluster and in a production like environment, just to make sure it's good to go. Okay. Cool. So covered a lot. I think we defined sessions. We defined what we want to get out of sessions. I think as far as remaining items, there's a couple of different things. I'll set up a cluster to start trying to see the performance impact of what Cube's doing, and also just have my own understanding of what all this fun Cube stuff is. At the same time, Max is investigating going from pre-aggregations to setting up cubes, correcting the queries to make sure it's compatible with ClickHouse, and then seeing which tool is best for our case here, and then how much work is involved to actually surface the session data we want to present on the dashboard. On top of all of that, we will get a bunch of different issues set up. I'll transfer this back into a single source of truth. And yeah, I think we're good to go as far as this session is concerned, unless we have anything else we want to cover.
Yeah, I will update this Jitsu replacement epic with more information and drop this then also in the analytics section Slack channel as soon as I have some info in there. And yeah, thanks a lot. It looks great progress-wise. I'm really looking forward to connecting the widget designer to mouse and DAOs and then to sessions. Oh, this would be nice.
Yeah,
cool.
I think, yeah, and I think it's worth noting that like, let's not worry about user-defined cube schemas for now. Like this is purely for internal preview and for the pre-built dashboards. I just want to make sure, like, yeah, this can get very complicated very quickly, but just want to make sure we're approaching it from a more limited scope here. Yeah,
sounds good to me.
Awesome. Then with that, I wish everyone a good evening, afternoon, morning, whatever it is in your time zone, and have a good rest of your
Who knows?
Time is irrelevant at this point, but yeah, have a good whatever, and then see everyone next time.
See you later, folks.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah.